Yeah, the vaccine is really important. And I think that what we're talking about here is a series of steps. And really, if we get the steps right, we have a fairly good outcome, maybe a really good outcome for America. If we take the steps in the wrong way, we could have a really devastating outcome for our nation. When it comes to a vaccine, will a vaccine be available to the general public? I think that you will have vaccines. I think the effectiveness of the vaccines will differ. I also don't think that a true vaccine comes in until much later. Now, let me pull up the chart of the United States and bring it back. Okay. One thing I have noticed about outbreaks in the United States and I won't say significant outbreaks, I'll say these are small outbreaks or large outbreaks. But again, having Chiron sort of dancing around the beginning of the fourth house seems to align with, outbreaks of various diseases. But what I also noticed, because Pluto is also the planet of death, I have noticed that at particular moments, especially when Pluto, is in a challenged relationship to Mercury. Now, Mercury is a planet of thought and communication, but in the placement of a nation, it's a nation's ability to communicate and to move around, to be social, to be able to communicate, what have you. And so what I think right now, one of the biggest things that's happening this year is Pluto's opposition to Mercury. And I think that that is a real thing that killed travel, that killed trade, that killed our ability to work, and therefore, with the lockdown, people's ability to move around. I do think that I'm looking at Pluto moving away from this opposition to start to give us a little bit more freedom in our mobility. I look for that to occur sometime in the spring of 2021, as early as the spring of 2021, but potentially not until late, let's say December 2021, January 2022. Now, this is sort of how I answer this vaccination question. Because of the Pluto energy, and Pluto's here in this opposition, what I have seen and studied is that we have had serious outbreaks of things that we couldn't necessarily gain control of through a full-fledged vaccination at these Pluto turns. And so when I do look at this, let me pull my notes up here for a moment. Okay. So just throwing out some of these dates. At the conjunction, say around 1776, the issue was smallpox, okay? And smallpox was not something that we found a cure for, say, at that time. It came much later. In fact, the vaccine for smallpox didn't come until 1796. Then at the Pluto square, the issue was yellow fever. Okay, we didn't necessarily come up with a solution for yellow fever right away. It was interesting because at the opposition, there was actually the Great Depression, where we actually saw maybe an underreporting of health matters, but the biggest thing was suicide, and therefore, on some level, maybe depression or clinical depression. That wasn't something that we, necessarily found a cure for right away. And then at the second square, which was in 1981, 1982, we had AIDS. Okay, AIDS popped onto the scene, and we really don't have a clear cure or vaccine for AIDS. And so this disease comes at a time where the potential for finding a clear and concise vaccine, it doesn't suggest we find something that's going to be wholly effective and it's going to eradicate it. So that's one issue. The second issue is that I don't think that you're going to have we're not in a time where here in America you have a receptiveness to a vaccine, even if it did work. I strongly feel that because of social and cultural issues where we are right now, even if you did have a vaccine, everyone is not going to be in agreement with, how it should be administered. if they should take it or not, if it should be mandatory or not. I think that what we're seeing, the great divide and, how we handle lockdown, how we handle wearing masks, has a lot to do with all of this energy in the second house. We're being sort of faced with our value system as a nation. And right now, we're just simply too torn to be able to have an effective rollout of a vaccine. Okay. And which is another reason why we probably do have the highest numbers of COVID as well. And so those two things, I think, are going to keep make it difficult for us to have a best case scenario where even if we did have an effective world vaccine by spring of 2021, its effectiveness here in the United States, we may not see until sometime later. Okay. And I also want to say too, I don't think that we're going to, I think the earliest that we could potentially get a vaccine is going to be a really effective vaccine that works is going to be 2026. And the reason I say that, I just want to show you something really quickly. Okay, this chart here is actually the chart that of the date that the smallpox vaccine was created or discovered. And this is where I want to say that, sometimes astrology doesn't always lead us to the clearest path. And so this right here is an application of astrology that's not necessarily taught. And definitely is not, I think, the use of astrology that most people would relate to. But what I'm focused to here is aspect patterns in the chart. And what I noticed about this particular date when this vaccine, and this is probably, as far as vaccines are concerned, the most effective vaccine and really being a cure to the challenge that it was designed for, is this envelope, okay, that we see here between the planet of Jupiter, okay, Venus and the North Node, coming down to Chiron, and then moving over to the South Node, and then moving back up to Jupiter. Jupiter, the planet of good fortune, growth, and expansion. Venus, the planet of harmony, beauty. Chiron, the wounded healer, okay, a planet of wounding, but also a planet of healing. And then with the nodal energies, we're really talking about, adding in this addition of karma. And this is an aspect when a person has it in their charts, it's an aspect of a humanitarian. And so this would be a time, where I would expect that humanitarian energy would be there to bless us here on Earth. Okay. And so to be honest with you, where I see us now, I don't see that same aspect and that sort of same energy. And that's sort of like what I use as my basis to look for this energy. Or potential solution. I don't really see that popping up until, say, around fall of 2026. Okay. So we actually get it here in the fall of 2026 where we have Venus, okay? We have the envelope here incorporating Venus, the nodal energies, okay? Jupiter, as well as Chiron. So if I were to mark a date, as far as when I would put, if we don't have a real cure by this time where I would really put my resources into finding a cure, it would be around this date. And it still puts us in the window of the second Pluto conjunction as well. That phase won't end until 2028, I mean. So yeah, those are my feelings on a vaccine. When will the economy get back to normal? If everything goes well, you could start to see the economy, not necessarily the market, but the economy making its way back to normal as early as spring of 2021. That's the best case scenario.
When you said that there were some effective vaccines out too, as early as.
Yes. And so what I think here is that in best case scenarios, if you get an effective vaccine and one that can reduce the numbers that most people are going to be willing to take or, engage with. And then this would also, another, I think, step to this would be that you would have some resolution with the election by then. That's a big part, especially when we talk about markets. If you don't have a resolution as to who is the president shortly after November 3rd, you potentially are looking at another market crash. Okay. So when it comes to the economy, one of the issues here is, and I'm basing, and I just want to give you an observation. I'm not just like pulling this out of thin air, but I'm really basing this on some astrological research that I've done. So with the chart of the United States, and then if we bring in the transits, I want to go back to March 3rd of 1933, okay, because that was actually the date that we sort of give to marking the end of the Great Depression, because that was the beginning of the introduction of FDR's New Deal, okay? So when we go back to that time, we were in a Pluto opposition at that time. But one of the things that I think was very stabilizing at that point was that you had Saturn in the second house, which is the house of a nation's money, and it had reached 11 degrees, close to 14 degrees. And I would say within 3 degrees, obviously, of 14 degrees. And the reason why 14 degrees is so important is because Saturn in the chart of the United States is 14 degrees Libra. And Saturn in the chart of any nation is the chart of its leadership. And so when you have a Saturn-Saturn trine, that means that you have a strong sense of leadership that is offering stability to the economy of a nation. And with Saturn being at the end of the second house, this is definitely more of a favorable time for the structural economy of the nation. So now, if we go back to where we are now, okay, now we're in our Pluto conjunction, but Saturn is reaching that place, if you will, okay, of being close to 14 degrees Aquarius. So the potential is that we could see something as early, okay, as next spring, as we get into 12 degrees, but then it's going to retrograde and it won't come back to this 12 degrees position until the end of the year. And so the election, again, is going to be so very important that we have some sense of stable leadership that is working to stabilize the economy at this time. And when I say stabilize the economy, I'm talking about an infrastructure package. I'm talking about a New Deal type of reform, something that is going to restructure our economy. Because Pluto conjunction and Pluto still going into the second house, that is what's truly needed to get us back on track. So any resistance to a severe sort of overhaul or economic plan is not going to be sort of the best steps to get us to the best case scenario.